Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
After many months of seismic unrest, Alaska's largest city prepares for a possible volcanic eruption from Mount Spur.
If we see energetic volcanic tremor begin beneath the volcano, then that will be a signal that the volcano is progressing even closer to an eruption.
What are the risks to Anchorage and other South Central residents, and how should you prepare? We'll discuss it right now on Alaska Insight. Mount Spur last erupted in 1992. The volcano, located about 80 miles west of Anchorage, has had elevated seismic activity, ground swelling, and gas emissions for many months, and scientists say an eruption is likely. The aviation alert for it is at yellow right now, and the big question on many minds is when an eruption might happen and if the wind will blow ash toward Anchorage or away from the state's main population center. Tonight we'll hear from scientists and emergency managers about the risk and how to prepare to stay safe. Before we get to that discussion, here are some of the top stories of the week from Alaska Public Media's collaborative statewide news network. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game is imposing what it calls unprecedented conservation measures to address declines of Gulf of Alaska Chinook salmon, also known as king salmon. The species is currently under review for listing under the Federal Endangered Species Act. The department said in a March 18th announcement it will be restricting western Alaska king salmon fisheries, including in Kodiak, Chignik, and Sand Point. The measures reflect a broader shift in strategy. According to the department, it's unusual to restrict multiple fisheries based on concerns for Chinook salmon across the Gulf of Alaska. It reflects an effort to distribute conservation burdens more evenly across the regions that encounter Gulf of Alaska Chinook. The restrictions apply only to purse seiners and are limited to July. 4 new faces are set to join the Anchorage Assembly according to initial election results from Tuesday night. With more than 39,000 ballots counted, Yarrow Silvers, Aaron Baldwin Day, and Keith McCormick are the leading candidates to represent East, Midtown, and South Anchorage, respectively, while Jared Goker is poised to represent Eagle River Chugiak. The 2 incumbents, North Anchorage's Daniel Voland and West Anchorage's Cameron Perez Verdia, are leading in their bids for re-election. The 6 elected assembly members will each serve 3-year terms on the 12-member body. Election officials will post additional results over the next 2 weeks, with results set to be certified on April 22nd. Alaska has returned to a period of slow but steady population growth as births outpace deaths, making up for migration out of the state. A State Department of Labor and Workforce Development report found that the statewide population has been trending higher since 2020, and the increase appears to have accelerated in 2024. The state's population surpassed 740,000 people for the first time this decade in 2024. That's nearly 8,000 more people than lived in Alaska in 2020. State demographer David Howell attributed the bulk of that growth to the rail belt running from Kenai up through Fairbanks. The Mat-Su borough has had consistent growth for decades. That is in sharp contrast to other regions. The population of every borough in southeast Alaska has declined since 2020. Western Alaska has also seen its population decline over the same period, but for a different reason. The population there is very young, with many people moving to hub communities or out of state. You can find the full version of these and many more stories on our website, alaskapublic.org, or download the Alaska Public Media app on your phone. Now on to our discussion for this evening. For decades, scientists have monitored Mount Spur. The volcano, about 80 miles west of Anchorage, has erupted twice in the past, once in 1953 and again in 1992, which left a quarter-inch of ash on south central communities. Alaska Public Media's Matt Fabian went to the Alaska Volcano Observatory and spoke with researchers about monitoring the current unrest at Mount Spur.
All right, let's step into the AVO operations room. This is where we conduct our monitoring of our real-time data coming in from our remote stations. This is showing a webcam located here in Anchorage, and it's pointed at Mount Spur. If you come over here, you can see another part of the operations room where we're not just looking at the number of earthquakes being located, but we're looking at the seismic data itself. One of them that we're looking for very closely at AVO is called volcanic tremors. Volcanic tremor is a long time continuous shaking of the volcano for minutes, tens of minutes, an hour, even longer. If we see energetic volcanic tremor begin beneath the volcano, then that will be a signal that the volcano is progressing even closer to an eruption.
Yeah, so this is the Tephra Lab, and we want to be able to get as much information from that ash as we can about the volcano. This is a sample that actually fell in Anchorage in August of 1992. And if you look really closely, it's a very coarse-grained ash. It's very gritty. In some ways, this is not as bad for your health as a lot of volcanic eruptions because the grain size is coarser, so it doesn't get into your lungs, and it's not quite as hazardous. However, we've also been looking in our archives and from samples that people had given us over the years from the 1953 eruption, and it's really fine-grained and really powdery. And this stuff would get resuspended more easily, it would get into your equipment more, into your house more, and also potentially be more dangerous for your lungs. So we're looking at all of these old samples to understand a range of what Spur can produce to help people prepare.
And that's the aim of tonight's discussion, clarity to help us better understand how to prepare for the potential of ash falling on Anchorage after a Mount Spur eruption. With me this evening is David Schneider. David is a geophysicist or a volcanologist, I guess either works, huh?
Yep.
With the Alaska Volcano Observatory. And Carrie Wiedeker is the Disaster Recovery Coordinator for the City of Anchorage. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
So, David, I am fascinated by that discussion of volcanic tremors. I had never heard of that before. What's known about this activity, and what happens? Is it a violent shaking that dislodges outside debris? Is it from magma coming up into chambers? What causes it?
It's a great question, and it's funny. There really is no one true source of tremor. There's lots of processes that can lead to it, but you can think of it mainly as like a fluid moving through a pipe. And so just like a pipe organ has fluid air moving through it, and it causes a resonance and it gives off a tone. Same thing with volcanoes. So fluids moving in a volcano, either from gas or other sorts of fluids like water, that would cause a constant shaking of the ground and lead to this process. It's not anything that anyone would feel, even if you're on a volcano that's experiencing it. You would never even feel it. It's just much too subtle.
Okay, so the seismic sensors that you have there would pick it up, but
yeah, they're extremely sensitive. And some volcanoes, such as Shushalden, which erupted a couple of years ago in the Aleutians, that was really characterized by just long periods of tremor that was related to the magma moving up prior to an eruption. Spur's a little bit of a different beast in how we categorize volcanoes, but again, it's just that sort of movement of fluids like gases, or liquids, or in some case magma. So just being able to differentiate that is something that the seismologist would be doing.
Really interesting. Is there any sort of I know that would give you an indication that perhaps an eruption is imminent. Does that activity go on? I guess he said it could last for minutes or even days, huh?
Yeah, in 1992, the first eruption was preceded by tremor that was in the weeks before the final eruption. And that's what we've been telling the public, that even though we're at aviation color code yellow and ground alert advisory, to get to that next level, that would really be like a continuous, tremor would have to be more continuous. and it would likely be in the weeks to days prior to an eruption.
Okay. Earlier this week, your colleague was on Alaska, Talk of Alaska with us, Christy Wallace, and she noted that seismic activity and ground deformation had subsided a bit in the past week. What do you see today for activity at Mount Spur?
You know, all volcanoes, that are in a period of unrest, the activity will wax and wane. Like some weeks you get a little bit more, some weeks a little bit less. So right now, what we've been telling people is we're really not accelerating or decelerating at any great degree. And that can have a really long fuse prior to an eruption. It can really last months. And so we're not trying to be too wishy-washy about that, but that's just how volcanoes are. You can think of like you light a fuse, and sometimes, at the end when the fuse gets to the dynamite, it goes bang. Sometimes it's a dud. And so at this point, there's really, unless things are increasing or decreasing, we're just in that sort of, we think the fuse is lit, but we don't know exactly when it'll go off and whether or not, or if it'll go off, to be honest. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Carrie, thanks for your patience here. You also joined us on Talk of Alaska earlier this week. Describe the plan the city has in place for both notifying people if an eruption occurs and other measures that both the city is undertaking and you want citizens here to do to be prepared to shelter in place for a period of time.
Well, we always recommend, it's standard practice in Alaska to recommend people have at least a 2-week emergency preparedness kit on hand. We have earthquakes that we have no notice about. It's nice to have some notice for once for the volcano. Yeah. We can go through our emergency kits and make sure we have all of our supplies. People with particular vulnerabilities, pre-existing lung conditions in particular, may want to be extra certain they have N95 masks on hand, that they shelter in place longer to avoid the ash. But it's really all we advise people to have is the standard emergency preparedness kit, which is roughly a 2-week supply of food and water on hand. Because if we had a major earthquake, we wouldn't have this kind of notice to be ready. This is a great opportunity for people to go through their kit and make sure they don't have a bunch of expired granola bars in there. And in terms of the cleanup and alerting, there's a lot of ifs in our plans because we don't know if or when the volcano is going to go off.
Sure. We
don't know what direction the wind is going to be blowing when it goes off. So we are encouraging everyone to sign up for the rave alerts, which we have that information on our website and on our Facebook page. You just text the word Anchorage to the number that we have listed, and you get signed up to get the rave alerts. If you already get the alerts that Anchorage Police Department sends out, then you're already signed up. If we sense that it's an imminent threat, we absolutely have the capability to send out an emergency alert system message, like the ones that go across your television screen. And we're working out the instances when we're going to potentially do that and the language we would use and whether or not that goes out over what system. But if you sign up for rave alerts, if there's an emergency, you'll know it.
And I know that you've got to assess what kind of alerts you'll be sending out based on what actually happens. But do you anticipate that you will send out an alert initially if an eruption does happen, regardless of what we know yet about wind direction or anything? Will you be sending out an alert, oh, Mount Spur has gone off?
It's highly likely that we'll send out at least a rave alert. That I can say for sure. Everything else is kind of up in the air.
Depends on what's happening.
And they're working out the plans and the instances and talking about, because do you want to be woken up in the middle of the night if
Well, I'm in the news business, so yes.
If it's not coming this direction, or do you know?
Me too.
That's
Yes, I always want to be. I want to be right in the front line when something happens.
Not everybody does.
No, I know, of course. David, in the video that we saw the difference in ash from the 1992 eruption, larger, coarser ash, and the 1953 eruption, finer particulate, bad for lungs. If both eruptions came from the same crater peak, What does the difference in ash indicate? Is it the force of the eruption, or what changes it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and our geologists have been going back and looking at that. One mechanism to produce finer ash is to have more water involved in the eruption. So in 1953, there was actually glacial ice and snow in Crater Peak, and so one hypothesis is that because of all that availability of water, the fragmentation is much greater, and that's pretty standard for volcanoes. So more water in an eruption can produce finer grained ash. In 1992, there was a lake in Crater Peak, but it absolutely changed color, then dried up and blew away prior to the eruption. It was kind of a thing.
Wow.
So that was indication that a lot more heat was available, and so there wasn't really that source of sort of vent water. So I think that's kind of our leading hypothesis right now as to why that is. In addition, like stronger winds will move ash, coarser grained ash, cause coarser grained ash to fall out versus like calmer winds, because the coarse grained stuff is fallen out near the volcano, and by the time it gets over to Anchorage, maybe only the fines are left. That's probably not the case here, because even if you look at the ash near the volcano, my colleague Christy has done that in the past along with the other geologists, it's very fine grained, very near the source. So it's probably an influence of water. Although that deposit wasn't well studied in 1953 because Alaska wasn't even a state at that point, and there really wasn't that level of sampling that went on back then.
The Alaska Volcano Observatory has an ash cloud forecast webpage, which is kind of cool to look at that modeling. Tell us about how this would be used when and if Spur erupts.
Yeah, that work really is the fruit of the labor that started after the 2009 eruption of Redoubt, when there was a little bit of ash fall in Anchorage, and we realized there really wasn't a model that was going to predict, based on the eruptive conditions and the weather or in the winds, like what was going to happen. And so a group of USGS modelers and geologists got together and developed a model called ASH 3D. And so this model is run twice each day for just a sort of a logical size eruption of Mount Spur, and that's put on our webpage, and it forecasts the thickness and as well as the timing of when ashfall were to occur if it were to erupt at these specific times. During an actual eruption, we will be updating that with the start time and the cloud altitude, and that'll get updated on our webpage. Then the National Weather Service, the Anchorage Forecast Office, who has the responsibility for issuing ashfall warnings, takes that information and incorporates it into their warnings. In addition, we're running a series of models each day that look at a variation in eruption cloud height and timing, and that produces like how likely it is that ash would fall in particular areas. And so that's run for like the current day, the next day, and the following day. And that just gives you like the big picture, 1 and 2 days out, if the volcano were to erupt, what areas would be impacted. Because not every area is going to be impacted the same during an eruption. That's a big message that we're trying to get out. And so that's also available just for more planning purposes. And I think it's much more useful to the public and to various sectors if the volcano were at elevated alert levels than where we are right now. At this point, it's nice to look at. You can become familiar with it. It'll become much more useful, I think, if we are moving closer to an eruption.
All right, thank you. Carrie, when we were on Talk of Alaska discussing this, you mentioned that ash is more likely to be a nuisance rather than a true hazard. And so the big takeaway is just be ready to hunker down for some period of time. Especially if the air looks foggy or cloudy, then that would be an indication that there's particulate suspended and folks should stay out of that. What makes sense, though, for preparation? I see people buying goggles and masks for their dogs and, kind of going over the top with some of these preparations. I adore my dog, but I have no plans to buy her any dog goggles. So what are you recommending to folks in that regard?
That's absolutely a personal choice, right? I mean, I completely understand people wanting to take care of their pets, and pets spend a lot of time outside. We've been working very closely with the state of Alaska to have a really comprehensive frequently asked questions on their website, ready.alaska.gov. That is the best place to go with any questions or concerns that you have. It's updated regularly. Every time someone comes up with a question we haven't thought of yet, it gets added and updated. And it's a working group of everybody involved in public information. We run everything by the experts at the AVO. That's the best place to get information about animals, people. The main thing is for people with pre-existing conditions that are particularly vulnerable, to stay inside during ashfall and to have especially an N95 mask on hand if your lungs are particularly sensitive. Goggles are a great idea, especially if you're going to be outside cleaning up, working in it. It's all very commonsensical. Like, it's not, we don't need to take anything extreme.
And one of the main things that people should remember too is it is very, very abrasive. So yes, you don't want it in your lungs, but also you can't wipe it off of things. You're going to have to use
Yes.
water to spray it
Correct.
off, or you'll be scraping,
Yeah.
scratching things.
But it's also not going to take a ton of water. You're
Right,
not
so
going to
just
need
spray
to,
it off.
it just takes a minimal amount of water to clean up.
yeah.
So I think the other thing that's important to realize is that there's, the size of the particles really will matter in terms of like the health hazard. And air quality folks from both the state and the Muni, we have air quality monitors here that measure particular sizes, and they will be issuing air quality advisories if the particle size is especially fine-grained. Even for people without respiratory conditions, if it's smaller than about 10 microns, which is really, really, really small, you can breathe that in, it gets into your lungs. And even if you don't have respiratory issues, you don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is something that those agencies we've been working with them, everyone's been working with them, and they're ready to go to measure those particle sizes. Interestingly, in 1992, even though it fell as a very coarse-grained ash, people driving on it and sort of routine activities broke it up into smaller particles, and the air quality actually was worse in terms of fine particles in the days and weeks after the eruption than it was during the ash fall. So that's a really important thing for people to remember too. It's not just a one-time.
And that, I believe, is one of the drivers between this effort to clean it up
Yep.
as quickly as we can afterwards to kind of minimize that risk.
Yep.
Makes sense. David, a gentleman called this week convinced that because there's been a lot of volcanic activity on the Aleutian Arc and because Mount Spur is close to the Denali Fault, he is very anxious that a huge Mount Spur event could trigger a catastrophic eruption and massive Denali Fault earthquake. Is there any concern or any connection that the AVO scientists have seen in this regard, or any historical evidence that one event could trigger a nearby fault earthquake to occur?
Yeah, and you want to make, it's easy to just say, well, make fun of people that might think of that. Not really make fun, but just like, I understand the concern that people have. I think that's the best way to put it. People are always concerned about this relationship between earthquakes that they can feel and eruptions. They're really separate processes. They're related in long that we're on a plate boundary, but the kinds of earthquakes that you feel here locally, that are due to tectonic forces, are really, really different than the groundbreaking earthquakes that happen at a volcano when new magma comes in. And so even like an earthquake on a fault is not going to trigger an eruption. An eruption is not going to trigger those kinds of potentially destructive earthquakes in other areas.
Okay, so it's not a Hollywood movie. We don't have to worry about
No, but
that.
and lots of people have that concern, and so I don't want to like downplay people's concern. And it's like, I think one of those sort of common things, and especially in social media, people talking about it a lot, and it really points out to the need to search for authoritative sources. Most YouTube videos aren't that, and so, but some are right. Some are really good, but some aren't, and I'm not trying to pick on that, but it's like try to seek out authoritative voices if you've got questions. And you can always write to, the Alaska Volcano Observatory and ask that question. It's a frequently asked question, and we can help people alleviate their fears. That's what this is about.
Yeah, fantastic. Carrie, there was some guidance that went out saying that if an eruption happens and ash comes over the city, people should stay inside for 4 hours or so. Is that just sort of a general guidance, or where did that number come from?
That number came from our friends at the AVO. It's what the ashfall events have lasted in kind of that general time frame in the past, and that's the information we have to go on. So that's our expectation, is roughly 4 hours. The main recommendation is to stay inside, shelter in place during ashfall. So as long as the ash is actually falling in your area, stay inside, stay out of it, and but once it's settled, once it's no longer falling, you can go about your daily business, maybe try to not drive around as much if you can, so that we can clean up. But don't cancel doctor's appointments. Go to the grocery store, do the things that you absolutely need to do. But when the ash is actually falling, shelter in place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Say, in 1953 and 92, there was a period of time when it was dark in certain parts of Anchorage. The streetlights came on. And so, but that's not everywhere. That's down the axis of where the plume would be, and at the edge it's less extreme. And so it really is sort of specific. It's like real estate. It's location, location, location.
And wind direction.
Yeah, and wind direction.
Speed and all those things.
I think some of the guidance it's like general guidance, but you still kind of have to apply a little bit of
sense.
observation to what's going on in your area. I think is important for people too.
Well, thank you both so much for being here, and thank you for the work you're doing and helping us all prepare and be ready.
Yeah, we're happy to be
you.
here. Thanks.
Don't panic, make a plan. No one can say with certainty when or even if Mount Spur will erupt or how disruptive an eruption would be. But the main thing to remember is not to wait to make a safety plan with your family. Do it now when you can calmly prepare. Stock up on filters for your vehicles and home heating system, swim goggles to protect your eyes from abrasive ash, extra drinking water, food, and medicine, so you'll be ready to shelter at home if an eruption occurs and ash drifts over Anchorage. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. Visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from our partner stations across the state. While you're there, sign up for our free daily digest so you won't miss any of Alaska's top stories of the day. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.